Welcome to the next edition of the Hack the Planet podcast. The good news is this podcast is entirely written, edited, and produced by hackers. The bad news is this podcast is entirely written, edited, and produced by hackers. But today, that unprofessionalism guarantees our lack of corporate entanglements is actually an advantage because we can talk about a subject that no sponsor in their right mind would allow. Protesters and technology. How it helps them, how it hurts them, and more importantly, how it can help them more. I'm your host, Ben. Hi. And I'm joined today by some of our usual guests. We have Dan and Justin are here.
How's it going?
Hello.
Hey. And Mitchell.
Hey, how's it going?
And we're also joined by some old friends who are new guests. We have Will Scott.
Hello.
Hey. Who is recently given a talk at the CCC Congress on private messaging solutions. I'll let him get into that more. And we are joined by Vyrus.
Howdy.
Say hello.
Hello.
Vyrus, who was recently featured in the Tribe of Red Team book with a nice profile.
Oh God.
Yeah. So let's start off with so we have so much we want to talk about with the protests and the new uses of technology and a little bit of backstory on how the technology and the use of technology for protests has changed over the past few years, as we've been, personally tracking it. And I think that between us, we have a lot of probably detail and sort of interesting backstory in a lot of areas that a lot of people aren't familiar with, because I know that a lot of us have been involved in these topics fairly deeply for a long time. Now, so we'll go around the room. I'm going to start off with a softball question for everybody. So everybody, I want you to tell me, is this the epic conflict we've all been subconsciously preparing for our entire lives? No, just kidding. Let's go
not.
with...
You almost had an eruption of 5 people at once.
All right. Let's start slower. Let's go with how have you been keeping busy during quarantine? That'll be easy to lead in. Minecraft. Oh,
Yeah.
Of course, we know my answer is always Animal Crossing, but Will, what have you been up to?
I spent the last few weekends writing an NFS server in Go.
Nice.
Wow.
Relevant to my interests.
That seems useful.
Is that on GitHub?
It is.
Excellent.
What's your GitHub username?
It's my name. Will Scott
Well,
/go-NFS.
That sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to check that out. Vyrus, what have you been up to?
Well, when quarantine started, I was playing a lot of Division 2, but
You can talk to Dan.
Too.
We talked about that a little bit. The lure shooter.
Yeah. It was a very interesting, playing a pandemic world FPS thing in a pandemic world thing.
Surreal. Quite surreal.
Mostly writing malware. Some of it is most of it's just enhancements to stuff I already have out there. Some of it private only because it's CCDC related, so we don't want the kids to get a hold of it. I've been doing a lot of work with Goquery, largely at work. But I just got a chance to do something that was cool because it was gluing 2 open source projects together, so no one could tell me I couldn't post it, so I did. There's a project out there by it's his name, but I pronounce it so bad it sounds like a handle. It's AB Gunthrie, GUNRTHIE, I think, something like that. I don't know. I'll send links to stuff. He has a tool out there called Goquery, which is a CLI client entirely written in Go designed to interact with OS query fleet managers. And it does it in such a way such that it abstracts the API interaction and makes it so that the user experience is very akin to SSH, except you get tables as your output instead of literal file system output. But it supports aliases. So for example, ls runs a query in the background, and then the way that it returns the result of that query is basically like running an LS, only it's OS query. So from a enterprise blue team perspective, this is rad because now all of a sudden you have SSH, so to speak, on anything you have OS query on without making it run SSH. So by default, they only support their mock server and a fleet manager called OS Control, which is written by a guy named Javier. Some of you know him. He's pretty cool. He actually worked on OS Query originally when he was at Facebook many moon ago. Super smart dude. But at work, we use a pay for third-party SaaS fleet manager called Upticks for reasons. So since their API is public, I wrote Goquery now supports Upticks. And there's a blog post and stuff, but it's pretty cool.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Very cool.
All right, Justin, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm tired. Started my new job. So I'm basically doing a lot of research on how to stop the stuff that Vyrus is doing.
You stop
Good
it before
time.
it gets there.
Yeah.
Dan, how are you now?
Good, and you?
Not so bad.
I don't have any puppers. That's a fake beer, right? They don't actually sell that in Canada.
It used to be a fake beer, but like all of the liquor mentioned in Letterkenny, it now really exists.
Excellent. As it should. As it should. All is right with our reality. Well, not all. Actually, very little. But yeah. So what do we want to do? You want to pivot topics, or what? Were you just punting to me for fun?
Oh no, we're just going around doing a status check before we get into the heavier topics.
Yeah, I've been dealing with like higher level functions at my organization. Bunch of budget nonsense. I haven't actually been able to mess with bits for the last couple of weeks. Oh, that's not true. I guess. Well, no. Yeah, that's true.
You are controlling someone. Never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel you, bro.
I feel like I'm in the same boat as you in that like I haven't really been able to do a lot of what I want to do because I'm so consumed doing what I have to do.
I mean, I think
I
that's
don't-
the
that I don't
part.
want
That's
to.
yeah. I think that's the part about hacking that the majority of the shock and awe, whiz bang stuff that you get to see at all the conferences. People don't really talk about like the actual mechanics of getting people who don't understand security to give you enough money to do security right. There's a lot of work that goes into that. People who've been doing it for a while.
It is a slug.
It is an essential.
Oh
skill.
my goodness! I just made some connections. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
These problems are real, and I used to care about them, but then I had a 2-year-old.
I think you got the better end of the deal. Honestly, frankly, I would probably trade. But it's your kid, so it wouldn't really make sense for me to raise it.
That would be weird. Especially because
Seattle,
He has officially, as of a few weeks ago, figured out that like Siri will let him do things. So he started it started with because like COVID happened, so all the schools got canceled, and so preschool turned into like story time an hour a day, like 4 days a week. And it took him about 9 days until he figured out, because I would use that time to go cook or work or something, that he could hold the home button while the Zoom was still running. And so I would just hear the story and he would whisper to it. This is how I know he knew he was trying to be sneaky. He's 2, right? He would just whisper to it zombies over and over again, trying to get it to play Plants vs. Zombies.
Wow. The Borg is assimilated.
That is awesome.
Yeah, and I was like, there's so many layers of I'm screwed like going on right now. Like I ain't even mad.
my niece, I remember the day like my niece learned, Alexa, play Baby Shark.
Oh,
I got ugly.
We all
fast.
remember that day, Ben.
Are there like parental filters that you could? I don't know. Never mind.
Not for Baby Shark.
Yeah, not
There's
for
just too many versions.
yeah.
Anyway, Mitchell, what have you been up to?
I have been spending a lot of time, honestly, trying something a little different because I learned the other day that my video card that I happened to buy I didn't know why I bought it. I thought I might need to use it for password cracking at some point. I thought I might need to use it for something else at some point. I ended up using it for folding at home. Check the blog posts, talked about it in a previous episode a bit. And additionally, it's got a big GPU on it. CPU. It's got a 12-core Threadripper, and it seemed like the perfect setup to run what I realized was possible, and that was Minecraft with ray tracing.
Wait,
And so,
your video card has a Threadripper on it? Sorry, can we rewind to that?
No, my motherboard has a Threadripper on it
Oh,
on the
okay.
CPU. I completely misspoke.
Okay, sorry. I was about to ask a lot of questions and
No,
insist that we
but
dogleg, but never
it
mind.
does have 40 real ray tracing cores, though.
His build isn't that exotic, Virus, but you're gonna want it. It's still a pretty good build.
Yeah,
Good
no, it's
job.
fine. It's good enough. You know, I grew up a working class kid. I never had a nice video card. I didn't even know you could get video cards with dedicated fans on them until recently. And I was like, I just want a nice build.
Yeah.
I have to,
And so
he sent me a video from this setup, and he's like, "Look at this," and I was like, "Oh, whatever." And I looked at it, and I was like, "Someone has made some kind of like physical, light sculpture." And then my brain was like, "Oh no, shit, this is Minecraft." Right? Like I thought I was looking at a thing that someone made in a room in real life for a couple of seconds.
So
Yeah, the
it was
texture quality
truly
is insane.
bizarre.
Yeah.
you're all gonna hate me because I don't remember exactly what it's called, but there was a thing working its way around the social medias within the last 48 hours where apparently there's a thing where you can play a video into this piece of software and it will attempt to like that M player plugin where it turns video into ASCII art.
Mm-hmm.
Lib.
So this is that, only instead of that, it's if you load the CPU load screen in Windows 10, when a core is being used, it will turn slightly bluer with gradients going from 0 to 100%, and it will literally make and there's a demo video going out of somebody running this on a 32 core CPU. It will make a 32 by 32 pixel image of the video using artificial CPU load, and someone has like some super weeby music video playing as
That's cool.
like in CPU load.
no, that's
Sorry,
awesome. That sounds
it had to
great.
be said.
Yeah. No, that's less pixels than my setup, but a lot hardier pixels.
Go ahead and keep talking, and I'll see if I can like race through Twitter real fast and find it.
Yeah. Anyway, so it's a RTX is the brand name that NVIDIA is calling their firmware locked ray tracing sort of implementation. There's other video cards that have ray tracing cores on them, but apparently they're not the RTX brand, so you can't like easily. I don't know if it's possible run ray trace Minecraft. Anyway, so yeah, it's like I've been running it also in KVM. And so my next blog post is going to be talking about how I optimize the host, Linux, in order to run KVM a little faster, which ultimately makes Minecraft run just a little bit more. And that little bit with just enough that my video card has, actually, it does pretty cool. Like you said, there was the light sculpture, and then there was the computer sculpture that was like. I also want to say one more thing. There's two parts. It's a little bit different. I'm just going to give my review of Ray Trace Minecraft real quick. One, water refraction is very, very well modeled, and I think it was probably just like a neat trick they could pull off with the hardware that makes it look really cool. So that's another thing. And then also with the ray tracing, you're not using normal texture shaders in the way I think rasterization is the word. I'm not the expert there, but you have like light tracing, which means that you can display light with respect to things that are not in the frame of view. And that helps some of the effects that you can do. Like that means you can make fully mirrored blocks. You can that sort of like repeat with each other. And so there's like a whole room where it's like a rainbow floor and you walk in and it's like, it's just repeated basically until the render distance stops. And then also the darks are way darker. And so like you can be in a cave underground and like a creeper will just pop out of nowhere and you never would have saw it, even though you had like a very, high resolution screen. And that's just because of the way the darkness just sort of fades out in a way that's sort of accurate. And
So what you're saying is that all the voodoo magic that has gone into OpenGL over the past 15 years.
oh
and
no,
is
it's
now
not
firmly
OpenGL,
black
it's
magic is
DirectX.
being
That's the
exposed
shitty
in
part.
Minecraft.
I mean, it probably made its way over to DirectX, whatever its wrapper is over OpenGL is. I don't know. But yeah, it's DirectX ray tracing is the feature, and it's fun. So I've been playing with that. So there's a lot of cool maps and demos and stuff, and it looks like there's a community out there building shaders because I showed you guys a picture of someone's building a model of the Death Star in Minecraft with like textures realistic to the movie.
Looks really good.
The other fun trick that those RTX GPU cores can do is an audio noise filtering. They've got some hardware audio noise filtering stuff off them that's pretty neat demos.
That sounds useful.
Yeah.
All these people made YouTube videos of like talking next to leaf blowers and vacuum cleaners and stuff and having the RTX clean it up.
Okay.
and
Yeah,
cool.
I have
definitely take a look at that.
I have two TIs, and I've done some audio stuff where like giving it like 40 channels of audio at once and seeing if it'll filter it without slowing down, and like it does.
So I guess I'll take a turn. So I did get around to releasing our rewrite of the Backdoor Factory. So it works with BetterCap, automatically man in the middles, people downloading files, and injects platform appropriate shellcode. And that's on GitHub /binject /backdoor factory. And I gave a presentation about that at the virtual version of SummerCon. And that video will be available on YouTube basically any minute now. And then related to that, we actually have another. If you're paying attention to my Git repo, you might have noticed that I added a strange capability to our binary parsing library, Debug. It can now parse a binary out of memory rather than just a file into the same structure, and then you can dump it out to disk. Now, one might very well think that somebody could implement a pure Go version of Hell's Gate using such a trick, but I couldn't possibly comment. So we'll have more news on this topic at a later date. But
Pretty cool for writing worms, right? Because you could like store data in arbitrary memory places as long as they're in the process space, and then recollect them.
It's pretty weird the tricks you can do with this library now that I haven't found a use for, right? Like I can parse a binary and put it into memory, like load it. I can parse memory and put it back into a file. And I have no idea why I don't know. It's like I haven't quite figured out like the full extent of like weird stuff you could do with those operations. Because you can also like make modifications in between. But anyway, so let's get into the main topic, right? So this has been an intense couple of weeks. I would assume for everybody, but for me, a lot of it has been, I've been involved with a lot of sort of protests over the years for more abstract issues that people didn't really care so much about, that weren't so integral to everybody's life, as the Black Lives Matter protest. And I think from these other protests, like the WTO protests, World Bank protests, like years ago, we learned some sort of abstract kind of universal lessons, at least about what the American response is to protests, at least in my lifetime, and I gather going back to at least 1968. But for example, some examples from our recent history, when the shit really starts going down, there was a a feeling that so now that everybody can stream video live from their cell phones directly to the internet, that really makes it a lot harder for police to misbehave, you know. But there was one thing that everyone always noticed was that the way protests were covered by the media was very police friendly. The protesters were always starting the violence. The protesters were always violent and unorganized. The police were always, trying to maintain order, at least in the news coverage. Whereas if you actually went to a protest, basically the police would just randomly club people in the head or spray them with pepper gas and then just like go back to standing there. And it really seems insane, right? And there's always been this giant disconnect between news coverage and what actually happens on the ground. So with the streaming, cell phone video streaming, you think, oh, maybe this will save the day. But in the case of the BART protests after Eric Garner, at one point the police just shut the cell towers off. And that's a power that they have.
Which they do a lot.
And they do a lot. And when you look at Iran, which is another example that I've spent a lot of time looking at, around their elections, they're worried about people going on Facebook, on Twitter, actually, talking to each other about political stuff. So they do stuff like they just turn the internet off for a while, or they disable all TLS traffic. So it's like you can use Facebook, but you're going to have to go through a proxy. Nothing's encrypted or something like that.
So turn off full platforms like YouTube.
Yeah.
No, they have their own version of Telegram, and the database was leaked for it recently.
But back to America, traditionally in all the protests I've seen, the cops go down with, I've seen cops, I've seen FBI down at the protest just filming everybody's faces, and who knows what they're doing with that. And now you also have facial recognition being automated. They can just run an algorithm over that video feed. They don't need to do any manual work. And you also have stuff like IMSI catchers and stingrays that they can use without a warrant that can ping everybody's phone in a particular geographic region, and they can find out who all is in that square right now. And then adding to that, you've got like this incident in Seattle where someone, they thought they had identified somebody, from some kind of image. I'll let somebody else flesh out the details of this. And they went to her home later and like dragged her out of her house, and that kind of made big news. And now it's like if they get you later, Google has just announced that they're going to start deleting your location data after 90 days by default. But there has been a bit of a theme, like your phone has been tracking where you've been this whole time, and if the cops arrest you, they'll probably just like make you unlock it and look, so this protest, I noticed that multiple different people were streaming from all different protests. Like if you look at the woke.net or whatever, people have been aggregating video streams on different platforms. But I've also noticed that the platforms they're using for streaming are like Twitch, which is like AWS based, or Facebook are the two big ones, or YouTube, which is Google. These are all owned by the same big companies that are, have been pushing this facial recognition technology and sharing data with law enforcement without a warrant for years. So there's this real conflict between the technology being used in both sides, right? Like there's a good use for it in this context, and there's a bad use for it. So I'd like to go around and ask each of you for your perspectives on this. Maybe on interesting uses of technology in old protests, or new uses of technology this go around, or ideally we can get some ideas for things that could be improved or that might be better in the future.
To add a data point to what you said, you were talking about the IMSI catchers. So I can't go into too many details as to why I know these things. So I guess just take it as I said it, choose to believe me or not. I may or may not at one point have been involved with, on a contract basis with an organization that was trying to do security around Planned Parenthood clinics. And to keep things short, it turned out that their adversaries had adopted a standard practice tactic where they would take license plate readers and they would put them in the parking lots and just record all of the license plates that went through, with the understanding that protesters don't park in the parking lot, right? So anybody that went through was either a doctor or a patient. Then there were forms with, shall we say, very right political leanings, where these collected blocks of data would end up for sale legally by third-party entities that would get backed by super PAC money. So having may or may not have been involved with some, having been aware of this activity about 2 years ago, I heard very recently about some of the gun violence going on at shops, and how leading up to that there was reported, somewhat confirmed, at least in some isolated instances, not confirmed in mass, of groups of Proud Boys going up from Oregon and removing license plates and harassing individuals there. And they are known to be armed agitators among other groups. So, not putting my conspiracy hat on, but adding a data point.
License plate readers are actually pretty concerning too. I left this
no,
off the list.
I think there's just a culture with cops that it's just sort of normal to use that stuff. It's like, yeah, we catch criminals,
That's kind of what I was getting at, is like, I was trying to basically say there is somewhat documented evidence, in quotation marks, that what the cops can't get away with legally, they will literally just outright outsource.
Yeah.
And the thing with license plate stuff too, I actually looked into the state law in Washington, because I wanted to know, like, what do I need to show the state to be able to find out who, an address from a license plate. And in the state of Washington, you just need to be in a business that is somehow engaged in traffic services. So for example, Diamond, the parking lot monopoly in the city here, and I think it actually even extends up to Vancouver. I imagine they've always been engaged in some pretty shady business practices, especially around sending a lot of if you park in their lot and they decide that you didn't do it right, they'll start sending you angry mail demanding money, right? But I started wondering, like, how what gives them sort of the legal basis to resolve a license plate to a driver's license. So the bar, or not to an address, and the bar in the state of Washington is just, I am a business that does something traffic related. That's it. And you basically just check a box that you attest that. Yeah, exactly.
It's not like road traffic.
Yeah. I got PCAPs, man.
God damn it.
So I'll start with some ancient shit. In '99, in Arkansas, there was some logging going on, and we wanted to kind of monitor that, and all we had were the old Nokias with the green phone. We had like 2 cars. We were trying to figure out where they were logging. They're doing massive logging and shipping the wood to Japan to be chipped. And so that was kind of my first experience in protester tech. It was interesting. It's like you try to follow a mile behind and then like text someone back and you got to wait. I don't know, just figuring that all out. Clearly things have advanced, and actually at a mind-blowing rate, and particularly this year. So I'm interested to hear about all the new technologies that you guys are talking about.
Well, I've been thinking about sort of the double-edged sword of the cell phone. Like it can be used as a listening device by people contacting you remotely. It can be used to do basic sort of relationship analysis, because they can sort of ping your phone at all times and know where you are. And
sometimes that's a desirable feature. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and so the whole thing about Like the sorry, I gotta stop for a second. Where's that music coming from?
It's not coming from me.
Oh Jesus! You know what happened, guys?
What's up?
When I said Alexa, play Baby Shark, there was an Alexa
Yes.
listening,
Oh fuck!
and it started playing
Yes.
Baby Shark, and
You
it
just leave that in.
I'm gonna see if I can.
it automatically advanced to the Frozen soundtrack.
Oh
So
God.
it was playing Let It Go outside my headphones, and I was like, "What is happening?"
That needs to be left in.
Yeah, I agree, dude.
I
Love
failed
that.
at being a good member of this, the Voluntary Surveillance Society. Oh, okay.
Uh,
Well, my
well,
face is red. So anyway,
So technology is a double-edged sword.
yeah, no, technology's double-edged sword. But what I was going to say is like, so going back to like the whole Patriot Act and this whole debate where the John Oliver did that show eventually that was like the NSA can totally see your dick pics. They can totally see the content of the messages. They can totally see, they can hear your phone calls. They can see everything you text, which is all true, but it's irrelevant because no intelligence agency has enough human analysts on staff to possibly sift through the amount of data that they can capture.
Yeah.
They capture so much data all of the time. This was a problem even before, in the late 90s, they were having this problem. They could not actually put human eyes over all of the data they were getting, and things have just increased exponentially since then. So
and
the
it's
one thing
also
that
worth noting that that's not their prime. Like, okay, I'm not giving them a pass, but it's also worth noting that supposedly the reason they pursue that capability is because they're not looking to do everything all the time. They're looking to do basically what big corporations do with NetWitness, right? They want to have like a month of the whole world in a database somewhere, so that way when something happens or when they gather meaningful intelligence that something is going to happen, they can go back a month and isolate the actors that they now know about and extract intelligence. Not giving them a pass, like F all of that. I'm just saying, on paper, a hypothetical plausibility for a subjectively responsible use case exists.
That's definitely part of it, and they always use that as an excuse. But the other thing that came out of that, you remember their response to John Oliver, and all that was always, "Oh, we only look at the metadata. The metadata is all we care about." Well, the reason they only cared about the metadata is that the only useful analysis technique that can be automated that came out of all of this effort was relationship analysis.
Yes.
Relationship analysis, it's very easy to create a visualization that a human analyst can look at and use their more developed visual center of their brain to spot anomalies. And the way
A lot, but a good reference to this is there's a documentary out there called A Good Citizen. It is on the origin of this technology. It's basically about a guy back in the 70s when computers were in their infancy who discovered the value of metadata by listening to North Vietnamese radio chatter, and while not understanding what they were saying, using telemetry and tracking to identify hostile elements, and and it follows the whole how it became this exact science.
I can think of an application for that.
I mean, Uncle Sam already has.
Well, I can think of a good application for that.
Oh,
Okay.
go on.
We were going to talk a bit about open megahertz.
Yeah, man. Go for it.
Yes. Use the techniques against the same entities using said techniques.
Yes, this is a great example, and this is an example of something.
And
This is an example of something that was new this time that kind of people could crowdsource from home. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, so I'm holding in my hand. It's a black device. It's got like a injection molded plastic that's really clanky. It's got a USB port coming out and a place for a small antenna, and it says DVB-T plus DAB plus FM, and that's an RTL SDR is sort of the street name for these things, and it's basically a TV tuner that you can run as a software-defined radio, because it just so happens that the way you build a TV tuner that sort of works across arbitrary frequencies is basically the same thing as a software-defined radio. And so you can use software-defined radio firmware to listen in to parts of the FM band that you just couldn't get before on old scanners very easily. Like I had an old 10-channel RF radio bank, and as a kid, there was hardware that stopped you from putting in certain frequencies, and I didn't to ever take it apart and try and get around it. I don't even know if I would have had the tools to do that. But now with software, you can listen into arbitrary frequency at sampling rates only limited by your hardware, and computing power integrated with these things is getting incredible. I just saw something on Crowd Supply where there's a GPU with machine learning cores on the same board as something that can run 100 megahertz bandwidth capture.
Nice.
And so you could do like full Bluetooth analysis on a board like that. So this is what's capable, but I'm holding the cheap version of it. It's like $20. You can get one, and there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it. So one of those things is listen to FM radio, which is that's been a solved problem for a while. But we have trunked frequencies now, where basically what happens is there's a control channel that sends sort of broadcast packets that says this talk group is sort of the names associated to this frequency at this time. Switch over there if your radio's tuned to that frequency, and then it does that. And so that allows you to multiplex a smaller amount of bandwidth, because bandwidth is something that's in contention. You can have more channels, and you can do something like run your whole county off an integrated response where everyone has the same channels in their radio as everyone across the network. And that's not something easy to listen to on an old shitty 10-channel scanner. It's a bit more complex, and it used to be sort of expensive to buy this stuff. It only had a limited amount of hardware it could handle. There was only a limited amount of broadcast space, but the side on the side of the police for hardware had moved a lot faster than sort of like the open source side for hardware. And so there's people out there who have scanners that they would put on Broadcastify. But the thing is you only have one audio out, and there could be multiple things going on different channels at the same time. So you're going to be missing stuff when you have that. So like the Broadcastify feed is one thing that is choosing the multiplex. Additionally, some of those are on time delay now. And also some channels are supposedly filtered. I haven't seen any confirmation of this, so I don't know if that's true or not. But it's something that's in the range of possibility, all these things.
Broadcastify was the site that people were using to listen to police scanners around the.
I used it all the time, and I mean, lots of people did. I used it during the Super Bowl last year, and also was on the Snapchat map in Philly at the same time, and so you could listen into the scanner. It would say across street, and 10 minutes later, you'd see a video of what they described on the radio on Snapchat.
The maps.snapchat.com with Broadcastify, Mitchell got me turned on to that. That is amazing. That's like almost real-time video from the spot while listening to the police scanner. It's
you know where else you could have watched in this whole time? Yeah. You could watch foreign nationals in Wuhan who had VPNs. Dude, I saw what they were doing in the very early days. We are nowhere close to that.
Well,
what were they doing? What?
Everyone was forced to wear surgical masks. At every grocery store and every entrance, they would take your temperature. To every mall. They had a limited amount of stations. They were doing things where they were giving everybody CAT scans, and they would just go through multiple CAT scans an hour and using that as a diagnosis technique.
Like the lungs?
Yes.
Oh.
Because COVID can sometimes cause crystalline structures in your lungs that show up on a CAT scan.
Oh, it totally makes sense. I'm just like, wow.
They've got a pretty impressive amount of capacity. They retested all of Wuhan in 10 days. So that's like over 1 million a day. That happened relatively recently when they were afraid there was a second wave. And the government was able to just go in and sort of enforce a full retesting of the 10 plus million population in a week and a half. They are helped by population control. I think one of the major things that is true is a lot of people live in apartment complexes that are almost all gated communities. And so there's these easy points of in and out. And so most people were on ticket systems of you could only get out of your apartment complex once a week even, or a few times a week. You had these rations of how many times you could go out to go shopping that were enforced by either police or the security guards that were sort of semi-police in your residential block or apartment complex.
Wow. Well, even, like culturally, right? Like getting 10
Yeah.
million Americans to do anything is work.
Getting
we are
three-
very hard cats to herd.
Getting 3 Americans to do anything is, nigh impossible.
I have heard regarding the radio stuff. A mutual little birdie friend a few years ago mentioned some research that is apparently in a Usenix talk publicly, but apparently to call it out specifically is KG, so I won't. But something secret service radios and a similar technology of trunking, where this is the channel that tells you what channels to listen to.
Oh yeah, no, that's all open source now.
Oh, okay.
It's like trivial. It's like everybody knows about it.
There's a package on GitHub that works with GNU Radio and all that. It works with the Realtek SDRs. Oh, RTL is short for Realtek, the company that makes it. SDR is software defined radio. There's a really great site, it's like RTL-SDR that has instructions on.
Thank you for getting back to that.
Yeah, that has instructions on how to set up all kinds of crazy stuff, and I'm going to talk about like what I've been doing with that in a minute. But
it's fun to watch pager feeds going past too, because those also.
No, I've definitely
pagers,
captured that shit on like the waveform graph before, but I've never actually decoded it.
The pager feed thing is interesting too, because while normal people stopped using pagers, hospital staff and EMT people didn't. So it's
I have multiple family members who are EMTs, and I've seen their pagers. They're like little digital devices. It's like
I mean they basically own that tech now. And what's really interesting is when you see like pager traffic to like emergency staff where the cops aren't talking about it on a scanner you can find. Interesting things.
Yeah, no, that sounds totally makes sense.
So fundamentally, like how you kind of use this stuff is you can look at a wide band of frequencies and look at the signal strength, like the SDR will tell you that. And then you can see where there are spikes in the signal strength. And then you can try and tune that in and try to different decoders to see if you can decode, the actual stuff. So for pagers, commonly they're on like 433 megahertz. There's some other frequency ranges you can find them on. But the two protocols for that is POCSAG, POCSHG, I think, and the other one is Flex. And I've set up transmitters with software-defined radios because I run a POCSAG pager network at Tour Camp when we have it in person, which is a lot of fun. Yeah. Because everybody, Shady Tel sets everybody up with payphones, and then
it had a connection to the Switch network too, the phone network.
Yeah, and then I hand out beepers, and we've got a full '90s simulator going.
There's a.
When I used to live in Santa Cruz, they literally drove the van to a party that me and my housemate threw, and like they set up on the front lawn and wrote the library that is now the POCSAG implementation on GNU Radio.
That's just
GR Mix-a-Lot.
Every first
use.
responder tells themselves, because you can get fined for saying stuff over the radio, and you can get fined for saying stuff over FCC. So they know people have the technology to listen to this stuff, and they've always, at the back of their mind, they knew it was possible that someone could be listening.
Well, so let's get into it. Like police radios, traditionally in this country, they all used Motorola trunking radios. And Motorola trunking radios were like not encrypted. There's an encrypted version now, I guess, but
I've used one of those firefighting.
They were like analog trunked.
Yep.
They're still everywhere. That's the default radio. And if you have multiple software-defined radio dongles, and you said they were $20, but if you buy, you can get like a 10-pack where they're like $7 each. $7 each. The little DVB dongles. You can find those in bulk. I was
about to get into that. The supply chain resiliency. That's a lot easier to get a hold of than a hack RF right now.
Yeah. But if you have multiple, the RTL dongles, you can listen to the trunking control channel, and then you can have the other ones like follow the sub channels, right? But there's a GNU radio library. So the Motorola trunking radios are the old ones, and there's definitely decoder stuff for that out there. The old Radio Shack scanners would do it even, But like the new radios are P25, and I believe that there was
SmartNet also is the other brand name.
Yeah, no, but P25 is the protocol name, And there is some amazing security research that was in a Usenix talk related to some of the rather tragic security flaws with P25.
Oh
So
yeah,
I would
no.
recommend.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would recommend that you look that up. But basically, they can have encrypted radios, but in a situation where multiple agencies have to talk to each other with P25, if some of them are encrypted and some of them aren't encrypted, they all fall back to being unencrypted. That was one problem I remember from the paper. Another problem is that apparently you can like brick them with a single command.
Yes.
Because this was actually a feature that was demanded to be included in the P25 protocol. They wanted the ability to kick radios off the network. So there's two levels of bricking. There's one where it just like boots you from the network or something. I forget what it's called. And then there's like the kill command, which actually your radio has to be unlocked by Motorola. Or yeah.
Yeah, so the kill command, I'm told, was actually a feature request from a shady agency that wanted to deal with compromised radios, like in tactical scenarios. And then in terms of the auto, like they're not encrypted by default. If they are encrypted, there is a workflow there where you can actually, quote unquote, force them onto an unencrypted channel. And when they do that, they make a beep. And if you don't know what that special beep means, like it's very nondescript.
Oh no, people, because it would sound nothing away from like normal beeps, because like people have open mics sometimes and sometimes just random shit comes off the radio.
Right. There's like all kinds of reasons. But yeah, that's a thing.
So there is also a GNU radio decoder now for P25, which is called OP25. And you can run that on. Basically, what I did is I plugged 4 of these dongles into a Raspberry Pi. I put it in a plastic box, and I put it on my roof up with my antenna, and it basically connects to my Wi-Fi and like streams, whatever from the antenna, and I can like listen to it as a like an MP3 stream in like VLC. So I can like tune into P25 stuff. I actually followed some instructions from the RTL SDR site, and I set up airband. So you can also listen to the airplanes and helicopters, the air-to-air voice transmissions and ground transmissions. I also have an antenna set up to pick up the transceiver frequencies for ACAR and also for MLAT, which is like I think the military protocol. And I feed those into a site called ADBS Exchange, which is crowdsourced and is the only crowdsourced site that tracks aircraft that does not filter out police or military aircraft. So in addition to that, on ADBS Exchange, if you feed them data, you get like a better API access key. But if you just go to the site, they actually have a button that will filter out everything that is not a police aircraft, which is a pretty interesting feature. So I've been watching the aircraft circle the protests, and I've been trying to figure out which airports they take off and land from, tune into the tower frequencies, and see if I can dump what they're saying out as MP3. And I saw, so I looked, we were talking about this open megahertz thing. So this open MHZ thing, I just sort of used it. I don't know how it works. So I wanted to ask you about that, Mitchell.
Yeah. So basically, it exposes an API that you can sort of run as a library that's collecting sort of talk group calls. And so the way the trunked radio systems work is that it records things as calls. And so this allows you in the user interface for Open Megahertz, which is much different than Broadcastify, which is like a shitty HTML web player. Instead, you have a flowing graph of transmissions over a given space of time where you can have multiple interleaved calls sort of playing at different times. So that allows you to scroll back through the history, and you have metadata analysis over the frequency. And that's just as useful as the data itself because it allows you to correlate things and track things. So Open Megahertz, one of the cool implementation tricks is metadata on usefulness of a call. And you can just hit a star button. And it's something that you can just like have people listening to and like starring calls that are interesting. So you have to deal with spam in the worst case, but usually people don't give a shit to spam these things. And like you can just go through a night of starred calls and you just hear some really interesting things that all you know is that other people thought they were interesting.
Break down the end-to-end for me of how this whole system works. So you've got volunteers setting up software radios and sniffing for trunked radio communications, and then feeding it to this site. It's OpenMHZ?
Yeah.
And is that an open source? Is that open source software?
Yeah. So like in theory, you could host a mirror, I think.
So you could host your own copy of OpenMHZ and stream stuff to that if you wanted to. So I think that's different than Broadcastify also.
Right.
But so you've got one round of volunteers setting up the software radios and sniffing on all the different channels, right? So the thing is you can only really listen to one channel at a time to get audio per radio, right? So having a vast number of radios lets you listen to everything, more or less. You feed it to this site. And then the second part.
Go ahead.
The second part that's innovative here is there's another opportunity for kind of crowdsourced help where people can go in and actually listen to it, and they can be kind of volunteer intelligence analysts, and they can listen to the audio clips and flag whether or not it's relevant to what's going on. So what happened around these Seattle protests, I heard, is that they set up shifts of volunteers to actually listen to this audio that was being recorded.
I was one of the very first people doing it because Max, never mind. Well, he's public about it on Twitter. Has set up he was the first one to get a feed up. There was another guy, so there's two now. But he got it up on a day before the police knew this was possible, I think. So I was listening in on the first day, and everyone else was on Broadcastify, and they were all behind.
Yeah.
And so there was a hashtag, Seattle Protests, and then later it developed into Seattle Protest Comms, COMMS, that you can scroll through the archives of for any night, and that's also metadata tracking. So people were sort of like using like chords of hashtags in order to tag things. And so you have like historians, you can just search these hashtags, and you can get and you can scroll through to video, and you can just get videos of very interesting things over the course of the night. And you had to do 10 seconds worth of searching.
Nice. I'm correlated too.
Yeah. So just to break it down, right? Like sort of the authority approach to intelligence analysis is they can only have very carefully vetted analysts that they trust, not to be Edward Snowden, right? And they're having problems even doing that. So they've had to fall back on methods that can be fully automated, like relationship analysis, where they just harvest all of this data of who was where and who talked to who at various times, and then they just draw relationship graphs. So once you know someone who's interesting, you see the whole cluster of people that they were with at various times or who they talked to, and then you just start following those people around, right? Like, so they've had to fall back on not using human analysts. Whereas the opposite side, where everything's open and volunteer labor is fine, you can just crowdsource everything. You basically get as much human analysis as you want just by asking the internet, especially in this day and age.
People are bored.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's trapped in their house and wishing they could do something to help,
And it's made it into protest communications too. There's like someone who put out a guide for how to be a scanner. That's sort of like the term of sort of like art for use of someone who is like if this was like a Shadowrun game, they would be a scanner.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's right. I think that's right that we get through social media and through all of this video that's coming out and through an increasing sophistication of open source intelligence analysis that we can also have a lot of situational awareness, not as the police or as the centralized entity. I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, but the trick is then what's that final step of how do you make it actionable? What do you do with it?
Well, also that's not the end of the story. That's not the end of the story here. What happened in Seattle though? The cool thing about this is you can have you can go back and listen to things like days ago, and you can also keep that, and other people can archive it. So Open Megahertz only stores data for like 7 days before it's filtered out. So it's like storage is finite. It costs money. It's an open source project, so it's like fleeting, and so it's more data to store. And it means you have to mirror it yourself if you want to sort of like keep it. But some people do, and there's a call out there where you can listen to the fact that the police know that people are listening, and so they broadcast messages in interesting ways. Like, so there are multiple copies of this data that you can verify the provenance of, that basically it's like you would get a police call and the police would say it's in the quote unquote zone of there's a lot of names for this certain place on Capitol Hill, and they would use other very incredible names that no one else was using. It's sort of like, it was definitely I don't know if it was inflammatory, but it was definitely at least tongue in cheek. I will say though that also we know that interagency communication is a lot harder to encrypt. So like if there's an aircraft
storage
talking
like on that, like
Sorry?
what does it cost to store? Like,
Well,
how much
hard
space
drives
does it
is
take
cheap,
to
I
store
think.
every different channel and like all the different stuff? Like, what's the storage capacity for a day?
Well, the thing is,
in a
they have multiple
metropolitan
cities to
area?
deal with. So Open Megahertz, there's Seattle, but there's also lots of cities. So their data storage problem is like, we've got all this data, and we need to minimize costs. But other people, they can just store what's specific to them. So like for us, it's just like, if you want to keep tabs on Seattle, you just download Seattle, and that takes a lot less storage space. And so that is feasible within the range of commodity hard disk space.
Well, because they're probably running the Open Megahertz site on AWS, right? So they're paying for everything they store.
Right, and
Which actually
and bandwidth back and forth between things, and all the managed services on top.
Yeah. So there's, what about this sort of this conflict between, like, these mega corporations, it's like that are, everybody's using these platforms, for these, I'm going to say, being able to stream video from a protest is a hard requirement for, I'm not going to say, if we're going to establish a just society at all, there has to be accountability for what is done to civilians for no particular reason, and what has happened at protests in this country traditionally is illegal. It's against international conventions. They used CS gas again this time, which is
LRAD.
Which would they use LRAD? They use LRAD to like whaling vessels used it against the whale watchers, right? That was its main application. It's the sound beam thing.
I think what was surprising was like how many videos of use of force, like physical force.
Well, I think we've already been sort of desensitized to it.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
Like in the period the riot started, just the amount that came out all at once is just like, holy crap, this is so bad. Like it has to be reformed now. So I think it's more widespread.
Similar to Open Megahertz, asking people to archive the backlog themselves offline, to make a copy. The people there were people who started collecting all of the video from everything that were like acts of police brutality, and making a giant multi-gigabyte collection of that, and asking people to make backup copies here and there. So I think Justin and I got a look at that, and we got a little PTSD. But the
going back to your previous thing about these large platforms. I mean, I think this is part of this larger tension of the transition of sort of our public sphere, and this sense that there's this communication that you have had in a public space where you've got a set of rules and expectations and norms that are sort of what the, maybe we have government regulations around what's protected and how that acts. But we've moved a lot of that communication online to places that are actually within a private entity. And now you've got this tension of these private entities interacting with the government to try and, once again, refine that boundary of who's in control of setting those norms and enforcing them. And part of that is a tension where the Google and Facebook and platforms of the world would really like to maintain as much power as they can. And so they will proactively police such that they're doing it unilaterally rather than, yielding back to becoming sort of these more public spaces where it's a government patrolled platform. And so you end up with sort of opaque censorship and opaque manipulation of the platform by the companies, which is a very different adversary than what we're maybe used to.
And I think I'm just not comfortable with, especially in a situation where people are, demanding just treatment from their society, right? Because things are very imbalanced, and in that situation, it's uncomfortable for me to have the thought that our, freedom is dependent on the whim of large corporations that control the tools that, let us hang on to it by a fingernail, And
it's also very uncomfortable when you know that those companies are themselves very much aligned with the government or with these things, right?
Twitter getting yelled at because of what they did with Trump's tweets, right? And but
Facebook got him elected. Let's not fuck around there.
I'm not holding one up versus the other. I'm just saying, there's documented evidence that even if one tries to do the subjectively right thing, it gets the hose again.
Well,
YouTube has sold its homepage to Trump on election day. We already know that on election day, the YouTube homepage is going to be full of Trump ads.
Well, and all of this.
Yeah, it's so weird when you get Biden versus Trump ads. Do you know what kind of video you're about to watch?
Well, and all of this is an infrastructure problem, right? At the end of the day, even the internet in a capitalist society is run by capitalist entities.
Yeah, and they can take it away. They can take it away.
What about
at any
the
time.
mesh net? The always coming, never arrived mesh net.
Well,
it's
funny
just
story.
it's a hard routing problem, right? I don't know. That's why I'm just saying it's like what survives, what doesn't, and what doesn't survive is the mesh net. I don't know.
TLDR,
I feel personally attacked right now. I feel personally attacked, Mitchell. So
well, okay, all right. Doctor, please revive the patient.
To fill in our audience, going back, I don't know, several Iranian elections. I don't know how many years, probably 7 or more at this point. I have been thinking about the protester problem, as I call it, which is this dual face of technology, right? So basically there are people at protests that need to be connected to the internet, and those people are the ones streaming the video. And maybe they can get burner phones, they can make burner accounts, if they're worried about relationship analysis being tied to the phone, maybe they can swap phones around. I don't know, but they're going to have to be connected to the internet. Those phones will be traceable. That's an unavoidable cost you pay of streaming video to the internet, which you need to do, because if you're not streaming it to the internet, then someone will just club you on the head and take your phone. Right?
What's the Jolly Roger resource for that? For people that need to know that these days, where do they look? Is there a source of information?
I don't know. That's is
that what we're talking about?
People are using all different live streaming things, like Periscope does it, like Twitch does it, the ACLU. The ACLU has an app, like the Copwatch app is a thing. Yeah, but anything that live streams video.
EFF has a guide. EFF has a protest guide of best recommendations for you're attending a protest, what should you be doing with device security. That's a baseline of a bunch of general stuff. It doesn't get into what streaming service should you be using, but it's
no one ever talks about how do you threat model. Everyone gives you threat model, but no one really talks about how do you threat model. And that's sort of like the meta skill that you sort of have to apply, because you can read these guides online, but really at the end of the day, the situation's evolving. Is your threat model evolving, and how are you mitigating that? And so that's just sort of like the thing that you don't get out of a lot of these guides, because sometimes the answer is a trade-off, and we're getting into the trade-offs here, but that's the whole point, is that these guides
there's often no room
the EFF
for nuance.
is a great resource, though. I'm saying this, like you said, it was a baseline, and it's probably great.
Well, yeah,
So I
let's
definitely
be real.
recommend
Well, and let's be real. If you could teach people the threat model based on a guide, then like whole jobs in our quote unquote industry wouldn't exist, because you just do it for everyone. Like,
right, but what if you get like everyone's bored now? So like you could, like, people are training other people how to do scanning. What else can you train other people to do?
Well, so anyway,
that's an important question, but
yeah.
The first part is some people at the protest have to be connected to the internet, and they have to have their phones, right? That's a given. It's, because we need to live stream stuff, and they need to be submitting videos to the Maps at Snapchat, site for the rest of us to get our intelligence, right? But everybody else there should not have a phone on them. Really. Like,
I think that's best practice.
Well, is it a safety thing though? Like, you get
it is a safety thing. But I mean, there's reasons that they have to have a phone here and there, but like, practically speaking, they don't really need a phone if there was something else that filled that slot, right? So now the problem with cell phones, I mean, back in the days, those Nokia phones, they didn't have GPS in them. Right. So like Stingray would work. They could narrow you down. Oh, you were by this cell tower. But that was a wide enough range that, you probably wouldn't get convicted on it anyway. But the new phones.
Wire.
Yeah. New phones, not so much. Right. They've all got GPS. They've all got, like, you can just ping them and they'll tell you where they are. It's like depending on the agency, they can ping them and turn the mic on and stream it. It's It's
also a note: the cops are not supposed to be using Stingray. Just saying.
Well, but it's not forbidden, and they don't need a warrant. They're just it's like
technically is. Technically, they're supposed to be tapping the tower. They're not supposed to be using a Stingray. But add that to the long list of things you're never going to get.
But freaking Santa Claus came one year, and they all have one sitting in their freaking back room, and they're all just itching to use it.
Right.
So it's like, if they're not allowed to use it, then why do they all have one? I don't know. Why do they all have CS gas? They're not allowed to use that either. The rules only apply to the unarmed people.
Yep.
For the most
One
part.
of the scary things on this round of protests was the directive allowing DEA to surveil U.S. citizens related to the protest.
Yeah, that was weird. I asked someone about it, and someone was like, "No, that's totally fine. That's totally expected." And I'm like, "Dude, what are you thinking right now?" It's like, it's very weird how normalized it is.
Also, private contractors.
Oh, of course.
Well, and there were, they had a bunch of people at the protests in military gear with no identification. There was a lot of weird stuff. Yeah. Oh well, they always cover the badge numbers. Like, that's a tradition.
The Department of Corrections deployment into
it's
DC.
An honor band.
Yeah, right. I got a laugh out of that.
Yeah.
Actually, the other thing I got a laugh out of. So one of the things that's always happened in American protests going back decades is that the protesters are always accused of having Molotov cocktail material, which is bottles and anything flammable. So literally, like, anywhere there's a bottle. Yeah, see, he's holding up a bottle on the video stream right now. That's Molotov cocktail material. It's Bullet 95 rye. That is a Molotov cocktail. Wow. So there's been this long running thing where the cops are always like, oh, the protesters had Molotov cocktail material, and that's why we had to club them in the head and spray them in the face.
They said it over. I was listening. They said it over the radio. They were like, "We see you can have Molotov cocktail material. Please do not deploy it."
Yeah, but this time they actually used Molotov cocktails and torched a bunch of cop cars, and I was like, well, this time no one's contesting it, I guess. They're just like, well, if they're gonna say we had Molotov cocktail materials anyway.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, I think that's one of those where if they're gonna accuse me of it, I might as well burn something.
Yeah, more or less. So I thought I got a bit of a
There was
chuckle out
also
of
a
that.
candle that was called an incendiary device. So, depending on who you ask.
Okay.
There were all sorts of great posts about paranoid cops. Like there was a place in Spokane. There was a bucket with some rocks in it.
As a black
for
person who
gardening.
grew up in Los Angeles, California, I don't think we need to debate that the cops have perfected the art of sprinkle some crack on it. Okay.
Oh, for real. That's it.
Well, I don't think that's so. The thing is, like, you accuse every police department of that. People are like, no, it's
I
like
mean,
it's more of a cultural thing.
mostly-
It depends. Sometimes that happens. I don't know. I don't want to get into that.
It's most of them. Like, there's a lot of them.
Most of them,
like,
dude.
the whole like
a lot of
few bad
places they
apples
don't need to
narrative
bother.
needs to die. Yeah, well,
There's actually a lot of sociological evidence on this, even beyond police and just studying corruption in general. It really is just a function of the financial support of your infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Like if you go to Egypt, all the crime happens on the street because the cops that's the tip of the authority spear, right? As opposed to in America, most of our corruption by volume happens higher up the food chain because we have more money, more infrastructure, et cetera. So like and then, you go to South America, there's similar narratives. Anyway, I won't get into there's lots and lots and lots of prior art here from like anthropologists and people that study.
No, we need to listen to more economists doing regressions.
Okay.
I always go to the I always go to like the Stanford prison experiment or like the was it the Zimbardo experiment?
Psychology of power dynamics and
Yeah. Basically, if you tell somebody that they're a special class and they're better than other people, like the cops are told and self-reinforce, or in the case of the experiment, it was prison guards, right? They took a population, they divided half half are prisoners at random, half are prison guards, and after a couple of weeks, the prison guards are basically psychopaths, just torturing people for fun, and the prisoners are all like, acting like prisoners, and it's I don't know. There's something sort of innate about human nature in there that's kind of hard to crack. But the amount of the other thing that kind of bugs me is our television programming is all cop shows about how competent the cops are. But if you've ever had to call the cops, like after being burglarized, you know that they do nothing. They show up and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're totally never getting your stuff back. We'll write down the report and everything and give you like, we'll roll our eyes at you and patiently listen to you for like 3 minutes, but then we got to go." Right.
Well, and like, that's kind of a perfect mirror for, I mean,
I love the cyber shows.
I was going to say this might be a segue, but like in a lot of ways, if you agnosticize away the platform conversation that we just had about, the dystopian future that is our Blade Runner reality, what's happening with millennials and social media right now is very akin to what happened to the general populace in the 60s, right? Where Vietnam happened and all of a sudden images of actual dead Americans was on nationwide TV. That never happened before. And quite frankly, if you ask anybody who studies anything historical on whether or not that had an impact, they will tell you unequivocally yes. Like a big part of why the 60s was the way that it was and why it lasted as long as it did and why it ended up getting so violent at the end of it the way that it did is largely because there was a lot of people who suddenly weren't getting their narrative from state TV.
I mean, so one thing that kind of happened that was different this time too is that the cops started shooting reporters with the like rubber bullets and the pepper balls and stuff, and that was like they always knew better than
you're in trouble
do
when
that
they shoot white
before.
people.
Yeah, well, but yeah, right, but but usually at the protest, the cops would like go around the reporters, leave the reporters alone, and then they would count on the reporters to give a very pro cop, anti-protester narrative to the viewers, right? But this time, they shot a bunch of reporters with rubber bullets. They put one lady's eye out in Minneapolis. Photojournalist, nonetheless. They slash tires. That's
that was insane.
They did. They slashed tires of reporters too
in Minnesota. Because they thought they thought everyone there must have been a protester, so we're just going to slash all their tires for safety. And it was like one of them was a camera crew from Quebec or Montreal.
Yeah,
Just
but
think-
as a
just
result,
think
there are
if-
all these news stories this time that have never happened before that are like the protester or the reporters are like, actually, the protesters aren't that bad, but these cops.
Yeah.
And that's back to Vyrus' point that's more reminiscent of
Yeah, I
68
mean,
and on.
even 15 years ago, right? Like you wouldn't have necessarily heard. We wouldn't necessarily be holding a podcast, right, with people who
No.
are scattered along the west coast of America about Joe Random reporter in Minneapolis getting a bullet in the face, rubber or not, and losing an eye. Like we would just never see that story.
So I mean, I guess like back to Will's point is, well, so what do we do now, though? So we've got all this new information. We even
And how do we
have
organize it and how do we communicate it as well?
Well,
yeah.
Notarchive.org.
So this is where I put my Negro historian hat on, just a tad. And this is where I say there actually is prior art on this. And this is I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm gonna like dog leg hard because this is like my private little hell. I spend a lot of time being just as disappointed at the protesters as I do at the cops, which is totally ridiculous, but that's just where I am. And a lot of it is because the cops have always been cops, right? Like the state is the state, power is power, and as bad as things are now, if anybody tries to argue to me that it's somehow equivalent to what it was in the 1960s, like you can get fucked. Because it is simply not, right? I'm sorry, I don't have the cycles that you must be at least this smart to ride the ride. But there's actually a ton of prior art here. So basically, if you read the history of civil rights, and the way that it fostered out of, we'll call them minority communities, there was basically a central theme that developed in the early 60s and ended up bubbling up into the 70s when basically they all got assassinated. And we'll return to that. And the tactic was basically, it was never about you. The argument was always based around the concept of enlightened self-interest, because if you're arguing about enlightened self-interest and you're arguing in a manner that is like legally doctrinable, then all the tone arguments go away and there's no more us and them, right? Like you don't have the conversation, Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. Well, who gives a shit, right? Can we just agree that kids getting shot in the face with rubber bullets because they wanted to protest is bad? It doesn't matter what color they are, right? Like that.
It's
That
hard
you
to frame that logic in a way that everyone understands, but it's like, I mean,
it's actually not, though.
obviously-
It's actually not.
No.
And here's my argument. Here's my argument. It's actually not, and I know it's not because we've done it before. And what happened is that the tribal knowledge of how to do this tactically literally died. All right, so
Go ahead.
follow me here.
At the farm
Right?
in Tennessee.
So
I'm intrigued.
we're barely post Jim Crow, right? We have the first early migrations of large minority communities, communities of color out of the South, because that's where we all lived, right? I mean, that's where you were, right? You were at whatever the plantation that freed you first, right? And as the mass migration happened, you have arguably around the early 60s the first generation of young adult educated black people, right? People that read some books. And they got together, and they basically, with the Huey Newtons and the Malcolm X's, then the F.R.E. Jabars and the Shabam Shagurs, right? Like there was a collection here. There was a mantra of, like, the example I always give is the free lunches or the free breakfast program, right? That came out of the Black Panthers in Chicago, right? They didn't argue for free breakfast for black kids, right? They didn't argue free breakfast for poor kids. They said, quite simply, kids that go to school hungry don't learn. So if we want kids to learn as a society, we should feed them. Now, did that disproportionately affect certain brands of the society than it did to the others? Of course it did. But quite frankly, who gives a shit? Right? If you need to win hearts and minds in order to agree that we should feed hungry kids, you've lost. You suck at arguing. And this was very well understood in the literature of the time. This was understood in the mantra, and just to put a tail on the way that this history ended, you had an entire establishment, mostly white, mostly old, right, who barely got out of Vietnam. It was not a fun story. Bay of Pigs is like just ended. We're halfway through the Sandinistas and the Contras battle that we don't want to admit is in existence. And a bunch of angry black people start storming the Capitol with a bunch of guns. That looks like an insurgency. Not giving them a pass. I'm just saying that wasn't necessary. The CIA response of introducing drugs, encouraging infighting, and tactical assassinations, which is literally the 1-2-3 playbook of any insurgency, right? Like any counterinsurgency, that's what you do, right? Arguably a rational response, not a good response, but rational. The end of this, though, is that you have this educated kernel of people who try to foster this concept of being tactical about your civil engagement, right? About your civil discourse, and they literally die, right? All the tactical assassinations were the educated people, right? Most of the people in those Million Man marches were not as educated as the people at the front, right? Just by numbers. So now you have this generation of young people who, if they're black, they don't have the tactical civics approach, right? Just because they don't have it, right? And they're basically looking for direction, and they're getting it from these white kids who are from the every kid gets a trophy generation, right? These millennials that we're constantly complaining about, who are like, like we all kind of walk that subjective line of like, yes, gay people should be able to get married. Yes, trans people should be able to use whatever bathroom they want. No, you not being able to go to work as a lawyer with green hair is not fucking oppression, right? Like there's us and there's them kind of on some stuff, right? And these are the people who, without, I don't want to call it a formal education, but without a tangible education on the functions of enlightened self-interest and how to tactically apply their effort, have collapsed into this concept that emotion is a valid reason to protest. And it's simply not. It's simply not. It doesn't work. Like, history is full of that, right? Tiananmen Square.
I would argue that it's distracting.
Well, distracting is the same as failure, right? I'll end with this, right? So I was on a call recently. It was a celebration of a mutual friend's birthday. I won't call him out. Ben knows him. A lot of you know him. And he got really emotional. We got super late. He got super tossed, right? And there's racial tension. So he, very very loving environment, but very emotionally charged. He starts going, and people start talking about protests, and at some point, I think people start talking about the coming together elements that are happening within people organically within the protest. And one of the examples that's lauded, right, is, yeah, I was at this protest and I saw this thing that quote unquote the kids do now, where like the cops start charging on one side of the group and it's a bunch of dark-skinned people and they yell white shield and all these white people come and surround them, and that was like touted as a positive thing. White children coming home with rubber bullets in their eyes is not a fucking improvement. Like, people in my family literally died, right, on my family tree for the idea that separate is inherently unequal. In no universe does the existentialism of that mean it's okay to shoot white kids in the face. But that's, that narrative is lost. There's no, the absence of being tactical with civil discourse allows a power vacuum or a tactics vacuum, and the tactics vacuum gets filled by emotions are valid, and emotions are valid turns into, as long as the most victimized people weren't harmed, then it's a win, which is bullshit. Anyway, that's my soapbox.
I think the level of political discourse in this country in general has just dropped all pretense of rationality. Like years ago, it's sometime in the 90s, maybe even before that. But it's been a long time since anyone even pretended to make any sense. People just say random shit and then get elected, and I don't know why.
I have conversations with my mom and some of the extended members of my family. I have a family full of educators, right? And they talk about how this Common Core generation, right? When they got rid of home ec, they got rid of art, they got rid of music, they got rid of metal and wood shop, right? And on the surface, it's like, well, that sucks, boohoo for those kids. But when you dig into it on an anthropological level, that means we have an entire generation of people at this point, right? They're not kids anymore, right? Who have never been forced by structure to engage with an idea that is different from their own unless they were in a literally dangerous situation. Right? They've never had a conversation that can get heated without a risk of getting punched in the face.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it's not necessarily irrational, for example, to equate microaggressions, perceived
physical
real
harm.
or not, with
Sure.
literal violence. Because from
Yeah.
your perspective, you've never experienced one without the other.
Yeah. You know,
Sure.
I wonder if
I mean,
things
I
would be
agree, but also I think some of the discussion on that point is I overblown is the word that comes to mind, but that doesn't seem fair because everything you say is rational, but it's just sort of like how big is the impact of this really versus how much of this is actually kind of disparate and you're just sort of seeing the outliers.
I mean, I think
Well,
when people are desperate, they collapse into what they know. And I think what I'm talking about is that without some structure to fall upon, without some, tactics training, without some fundamental assumption of truth, you do what's in front of you.
So,
Never mind.
speaking of which, Ben, at some point I want to throw it back to you to ask about the parts that went into building your airband.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll definitely put a link to it in the description. I just followed a write up on this site. You use 4 of those software radio dongles, and you just set up 4 different programs. And then I used one antenna and like an antenna splitter, basically, to listen to 4 different bands at once. And there's just open source software you can install on a Raspberry Pi. You just follow the instructions. It's wicked easy to set up. It installs an IceCast server on the Raspberry Pi. You can just stream the audio from. It logs everything else to disk. It's super, super cool. Highly recommend it. And you could feed your audio stream quite easily to something like Open Megahertz. You could also set up a similar deal to sniff for P25 or Motorola trunking. But the it's like I have noticed that the way people react to these issues is I think different based on whether or not they have experienced actual violence.
Yes.
Because I immediately know that somebody has lived an entirely different life than me. If they're like, I don't know what everyone's so upset about. I've lived here for so many years and I've never had any kind of problem. And it's like, sure, buddy. Like, it's impossible for you to imagine that you haven't seen like every, one else's perspective, I guess. That's strange, but whatever. But the just tactically, the we were talking about mesh radios. So I've had this mesh radio project for a number of years, where I wanted to do like encrypted mesh radio traffic that would work totally offline. I got it working on a number of different chips, including OpenWRT boards. And it just occurred to me earlier today, like, what if you took one of those $6 Athros system on chip boards and you put it, and they do 802.11s meshing, which is what I use my my protocol on top of. And you wouldn't have to use RatNet for this, but say you get one of these $6 chips, and it's a Wi-Fi chip because it's like made for making shitty routers out of. But it's got like a fairly decent Wi-Fi chip and then a CPU and like some built-in memory just in one package for $6, right? And you can put OpenWRT on it. Say you just added like a little LCD display and a little keyboard, and you made a little like text pad where everything was encrypted, right, end to end, and you'd have some like mechanism of like I join a network, by like someone I touch physically. We hit a sync button. It's swaps keys. We join the same groups, and then we can go anywhere around an event, and we can send messages to each other like meet at this rally point. Everybody come here. The cops are moving, or everybody come here. Like the video people, come here, right? But if you had something like this where people could just get text messaging back without all of the tracking, just on a very low, technical, tactical level, which is where I feel safe anyway. I wonder if something like that would be useful.
So I hate to burst your bubble, but
all right.
There's sort of PR spins at all of these major things about the next either Bluetooth or phone mesh communication tool, right? During the umbrella protests in the first Hong Kong one, it was Wicker, I think, and then there was a different one that was doing it this time. And as far as anyone can tell, none of these like mesh things, even with relatively high density of people, are getting enough to really function, right? And so, I think 802.11s as a longer like range thing has the potential to work at a much lower density, and so for a small covert network, actually it could work. I think you've got to deal with, as soon as you get popularity,
who do you let on?
Like gossip networks are the whole thing where we don't understand how to analyze them, and they probably are leaking a lot of metadata. If things get captured.
Well, so as I know you're familiar with RatNet, the way RatNet works is that everybody with a communicator, basically, you could have it work so that every communicator meshed everyone else's messages, even if they didn't have the keys for it, right? So everything could be a relay, or you could have it work like when you set up a network, you set it up with different frequencies or something.
I can actually share an implementation of this based on RatNet that has been to a protest. I can't give too many details, but
yeah. So we have done a lot of experiments deploying RatNet on very inexpensive Athros system on chips, I think it would be the reason that I went with 802.11s and had to give up on using a phone. So I started trying to put RatNet on a phone. So the problem with all of these other solutions that come out every protest, like Briar was one I actually tried to work on for a while. There's a bunch of them, but they're all internet connected. It's like some phone thing that's just trying to scramble your connection to the internet, and it's like cool, but they can turn the internet off. They can turn the cell towers off, right? And they have in this country recently. It happens, right? So you really need something that works with no infrastructure at all. And that's what and so I was looking at old phones back to Android 4.1 when Wi-Fi Direct seemed like it was going to be a thing. Which is basically just ad hoc Wi-Fi networks. But that was so buggy on mobile phones that they took it out, and it's no longer even in any hardware at all. And they replaced it with this scheme that uses NFC to swap a key and then makes a Bluetooth connection using that key. And that's how they do like phone-to-phone sync now. And you can't really use that to do mesh networking. And the problem with Bluetooth, everyone says Bluetooth meshes, right? Bluetooth was meant to mesh devices on your body to each other, not your body to other bodies.
What are they building that on top of? Is that like an L2 cap? Just like I don't know.
There's a limit of 16 devices. Lifetime total in a Bluetooth mesh.
I don't know. That's a cool hack, at least, that you got it to route packets in any sort of sane way, I guess.
But for both Bluetooth and Wi-Fi Direct, with your phone, you have to explicitly hit a button. A pop-up shows up that lets you pair with each new node, and that's just totally not going to work, right? So 802.11s is real meshing, and there are other real meshing protocols like Batman or something that you could use over on a real Athros sock, right? So you can get these chips now for $6. You could slap a battery on it, a shitty keyboard, a little display. You could make a completely non-internet connected text messenger for a relatively low unit cost.
It would
be a great DEF CON badge.
Onagachi or something.
I'm waiting for the device that anything that comes near it in Bluetooth range, that person gets told they have been exposed to COVID.
No, I don't. Do we even want to talk about that?
Yeah, that happens.
I don't think. I don't know. It's like I'm skeptical. Whatever. But if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't.
The obvious problem with all of the connection tracing is that anybody can install the app and then just say that they have COVID when they don't, basically. Just
and
to
also
fuck with
a lot of people are just. You look on Instagram, they're skeptical. They see like, what is this new feature that was not explained?
And I
they
bet you
just
there.
don't, and they don't check it, or they
I
uncheck
bet
it
you-
because they don't know what it is.
For this
I bet-
data to the fray based on the RatNet implementation, I can tell you there's been 2 that I'm aware of, actual honest to God RatNet implementations of comms at protests that I was involved in. I was not at the protest. I just helped develop the materials, and the materials actually were used in the field. One of them, and I had the benefit of relatively tech savvy people on the ground, so it didn't have to do too crazy. It was basically it's basically based on a few fundamental assumptions. Number one, using the internet isn't bad. You just have to be prepared for when it goes away. And the assumption that when it goes away, the priority of communication shifts from whatever the hell everyone else is talking about to safety and rendezvous locations. So all of a sudden your message chatter goes to 1, if not 0. Based on those 2 fundamental assumptions, arguably the first 2 tests were pretty phenomenally successful. I can't be too specific about the details without giving away the people, but basically there were 2 or 3 people with battery powered like net gears in a backpack. And then there was a box in the cloud running a RatNet router. And the idea is that the RatNet router can be compromised, and it's routing, it's not reading. So again, basic RatNet fundamental principle, 1 compromised node does not compromise the rest of them. And basically what happened is there was an app, and this is where I announced to the world that if you use TinyGo to compile RatNet, it will compile to WebSM, and it will load in a browser.
Nice.
Okay, yeah. It's like I'm not even phased by that. You would have told me that 10 years ago. It's like what timeline, Rick and Morty timeline did we in where JavaScript was the thing that's running web?
So you can run RatNet in a browser. This does mean that over a series of 2D barcodes, you may or may not be able to transfer a RatNet quote-unquote app by simply loading another tab. So basically, you have people who exchange 2D barcodes, and it comes with the peer list, right, and also the contacts list. The peer list is always only 3. It's always the 2 people with backpack nodes and the internet node. So the idea is that it looks like normal cell phone traffic. The cops don't have a reason, even at a relatively technically advanced level of introspection, which they don't have, that anything weird is going on, because it just looks like cell phones talking to a website. And everything is end-to-end encrypted. Everything is good and very good. If anybody who gets busted, you just close the app, and it doesn't matter if they get whatever else is on your phone. The data is all contextual. And then when the cops turn the internet off, it immediately goes to what is the closest access point on my peer list, and there's 2 of them. Not a perfect solution, but this was more than 5,000 people, less than 10. I'm told no one lost connectivity, and 1 person was arrested, and none of the data was exfiltrated. So, one data point.
Nice.
This is the first time hearing about it, but I'm humbled but very happy.
I think so.
I worked on it too, man.
No, absolutely, it's great. Well, so this is what I would say, right? At this point in
way
the
better
program,
than the MixNet shit that they're working on in Europe.
Oh, actually, so don't let me rat hole on this, but I am convinced that you can implement an actual formal mixnet over RatNet, but that's the topic for another day.
Yeah.
But I would say at this point in the program, if you've made it this far as a listener, congratulations. But if you're interested in this RatNet communicator board project, or deploying RatNet in your own solution, I have not fully fleshed out the documentation for it. So at this point, the only people who have worked on the project are able to sort of successfully be application engineers.
I think you would
but if
also
you
add
want,
that there'd be free training at this point. Right
absolutely free training.
Yep.
Yes,
I've done training on it before, and everybody got it to compile, and they ran malware over it.
Yeah. Oh, I thought we weren't going to talk about that part, but okay. There's a reason it's called RatNet. It's But in the RatNet project on GitHub, there's a docs folder that has some slide decks from previous presentations I've given. And if you email podcast@symbolcrash.com, I promise free tech support for your RatNet deployments, and some application engineering, at least until I get overloaded.
Can I ask
But,
a quick question
I am
about?
Yeah,
in
go ahead.
Gmail.
So you were talking about part of your motivation was around. Were you inspired or motivated, or not inspired necessarily, but motivated by and was there any correlation with Palestine-Israel conflict before that?
Are you talking to me?
I am.
Yeah, I think.
So
you're-
I got my backstory. I mean, the first protest I went to, I was 4 years old. I was riding around on my dad's shoulders, and all I remember is there was a crowd of people chanting, "Ronald Reagan is no good. Send him back to Hollywood." You know. And then I went to a bunch of protests over the years, and I have to admit, I always wondered what purpose they served, because the same shit always happened and nothing seemed to come of it, right? And the news wouldn't cover it, and only the people who were there really knew what happened, and it created this weird dual reality, right? So fast forward to I don't know, like 2006 or so. I was working on some project. I took a wrong turn. I ended up hanging out with some Tor developers, and they were working on something called. They were really there was a lot of volunteer effort going into helping people in Iran access like Twitter using TLS, even though the government was trying to stop them around some election. And I actually kind of got involved in some of that for a couple of cycles there. But I did a little bit of work on the Tor obfuscation proxy, like the second version, which was terrible, which was totally unusable. It was not performant. There were a bunch of problems with it. And I got thinking about how interesting, how useful it would be to have a messaging kind of middleware where you could just switch network transports dynamically. And just you could hop frequencies, hop transports, hop physical media, like just arbitrarily jump around without kind of losing connectivity. And then I tried to write the first version of RatNet. I figured out it was totally entirely wrong, and then I did that a few more times. And then after a few years, I'd actually worked out a bunch of kinks and kind of figured out some algorithms, and I started giving talks about it. And I'm not, honestly, there's some problems with it. I'm not convinced it's the ultimate solution. But as far as I know, I'm one of the only projects which always had totally offline operation as a requirement. Like, it can bridge to the internet. It works over the internet.
I think that's important, and it needs to be documented. And I think Will's about to drop off, and we want to hear more from him later about documentation of this. And Vyrus, you're still here, can talk about documentation of how to do that on the ground.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess the only thing I'd say, right, like, is on the protocol obfuscation front, that's still an arms race. The big news there this week is the Open Tech Fund in the U.S. government that was funding a bunch of this stuff just got a hostile takeover, where their board and president and executive team all got fired by the new CEO of the larger US AGM entity.
That's because they don't implement encryption.
It appeared that it's Latmos. I don't know exactly what the coalition is, but there's a set of a few entities primarily focused on China that want to take all that money for basically saying, rather than funding a bunch of sort of open ecosystem internet freedom stuff, the US government's priority from this essentially propaganda wing should be to promote a few centralized VPNs that are focused exclusively on China. So they want to have that money go to UltraSurf, Frigate, Siphon, and Lantern, I think, were the four that got named as sort of specific centralized entities that will do more advocacy of on the ground in a more directed way. But that takes funding away from a bunch of people who like having funding right now. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes up in that space.
Oh, wow. Organization that's getting defunded, what's currently under their umbrella?
Tor, Signal, bunch of smaller
I
stuff.
don't know that. Those are the only two things I gave a shit about, to be honest.
Everything that matters. Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think they
So
did GPG too. If you want to like.
Well,
oh
that's
God, what else is there? Ah. So basically Tor, Signal, and GPG are losing government funding.
Plausibly.
So basically, the administration as a whole basically just drew a line in the sand when it comes to the constant backdoor crypto argument. They basically said, well, we can't make you fuckers backdoor it, but we can stop funding any of the stuff that works.
Yeah, so this is probably related to that the three idiots who don't understand encryption introduce anti-encryption bill thing.
No, William Barr
right?
says someone's going to give him a kiosk or a solution on the blockchain that'll solve everyone's problem.
Oh, those are old buzzwords, man.
No, you could make so much money trying to sell that, though. Like, you could probably retire on that.
Dude, you didn't even say ML or AI. Come on.
No, of course not, because that's
OT.
overselling it. No, you
might-
no. When backdooring and like selling crypto, it's all about the allure of feeling like you're making progress. That's what you're selling. That's what it was with Ethereum. That's what it was with Bitcoin. You're selling the allure that you're making progress, and that's what the value is of these things.
I understand.
I thought Ethereum was like based on the premise that it's totally fine to run someone else's Turing complete code.
Is it everything?
Isn't
Someone did,
WS's?
Someone did y'all see? Someone
Come
did
on now, it has the word
Turing complete
smart in
code
it.
in
Don't
C and
criticize
print
it.
F.
All right. Anyway, we don't need to go down the
I can see
cryptocurrency.
that,
We've already talked about it more than it's worth justifying airtime for.
I want to create a project that just does dumb contracts.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know what it does
That's
yet,
already-
but it
is
does
that
dumb
not
contract.
DocuSign?
DocuSign.
DocuSign is actually publicly traded, and it's worth, I don't know, you compare it to Bitcoin or Ethereum. You compare it to Ethereum.
Yeah,
Compare
you know,
DocuSign to
that's a
Ethereum.
solid
Smart
investment.
contracts or dumb contracts? Which one makes more money?
So we're gonna make Dogecoin make a comeback, right?
Ain't nothing wrong with Dogecoin.
Oh, I could have bought low and sold high on Dogecoin. I was like, I knew. It was just like, oh, this is gonna just. It was before the NASCAR thing. Anyway.
Yeah, I like a friend of mine had a workout contest where it was like it was like a pot, and like you worked out per day and people sponsored you, and like you got Doge and you had to have Doge to buy in. So I actually
It's like
ended
the
up
$1 million homepage with where you buy a pixel.
Yeah, I actually ended up mining like a bunch of it and then completely missed just because I was working, like missed the spike at all. And I was like, I actually have a bunch of this. Yeah. Sorry, I'm still bitter about it.
I have a bunch of Litecoin in a wallet somewhere I can't find from when I built this liquid cooled machine. I just like mined Litecoin for a month to
I have
test
it on a hard
out.
drive somewhere. I think I had to delete the chain file. No, I had to delete the blockchain files are so fucking big for the whole history, the whole state.
Yeah.
All right,
I
I gotta
wanna-
go
I ended
off.
up having
Have a
to
good
do that.
night.
All right.
Oh, thank you so much, Will.
Absolutely. This is great.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, but I looked it up. It's like $3,000 now, so I got to find that hard drive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that the rants are good, high quality rants. I think one of the things that I want to touch on though is like, there are ways for us to socialize and spread knowledge on how to do, how to asymmetrically stress the techniques that are being used against protesters. And I would like to see more effort in that, right? Like if correlation is the primary mechanism, you can spoof like tons of device identities.
So here's another slightly more dangerous tactic I'll drop just for the sake of contributing to this part of the conversation. So many of us have a mutual friend who a while ago was on his first physical pen test. And it was a school, and it was a school that had a lot of projects with DoD, and so they had a very friendly relationship with campus security and local PD. And this was back when U3 drives were a thing. So he hits me and some people up, and he says, "Hey, I'm gonna do a USB drop. How the hell do I set that shit up?" We talk him through it, basic MSF Metasploit stuff, babies first, easy 1, 2, 3. And he goes, "How many drives do I buy?" And we're like, "I don't know. How big is your surface area?" And he gets frustrated because we don't have an exact answer for him. So he buys 1,200 of them. And he deploys them all over campus. Okay. I will fast forward past the slightly more hilarious portions of this.
Do you
And
just like
get
take down
to-
switches?
Yeah, so I will get
There's
to the
not-
relevant. I will get to the relevant portion of this story and skip the rest of it. That is mainly hilarious, which is that this basically makes the PD in this local area do the same thing that the Boston cops did during the Adult Swim ad campaign, where people were dropping.
Bombings.
Yes. So they freaked out and they went to gather these things because they didn't know why all of a sudden there were all of these thumb drives all over the campus. They didn't know what the hell. And so the cops actually gathered a bunch of them. And the first thing the cops did is they plugged a bunch of them in. And magically, he got shells on 41 different precincts by the end of it. Because it turns out, while the cops know how to hit buttons on Stingrays, they know absolutely fuck all about how computers actually work.
Well, you would never broadcast the reset password over unencrypted FM radio, would you?
The only reason I'm saying this is because, hypothetically, if a group of protesters got arrested and they had thumb drives on them, one or two of them had thumb drives on them, with white masking tape and marker that said evacuation plan or protest leader or Antifa expel spreadsheet,
You're
the
violating
cops
one of the
might be
prime
stupid
directives,
and might
Vyrus.
just plug some shit in and be dumb. I'm not advocating anyone do that, but maybe it's already happened. I don't know. And maybe it doesn't have to do anything illegal because it doesn't have to call home. Maybe you can just utterly nuke whatever machine it gets plugged into, and then that entity is -1 asset. Just saying. That's my contribution.
Yeah. Should have predicated, although all excellent, wonderful hypotheticals, should have predicated that plausible deniability is one of the principal prime directives. Kind of hard to do that in a safe way with a bunch of people walking around with loaded, and I use that term intentionally, USBs. But yeah, that's great. Like, it still plays into the same narrative, right? Like, well, asymmetry.
Is that enlightened self-interest, Vyrus?
Yes.
Of course. Absolutely, it's enlightened self-interest.
Yes, it is.
We're giving precincts training for free, right? This is part of their resiliency training. You know, IT resiliency.
I do think that like these the kind of tactical solutions where you're like, oh, how do you break their toys or whatever, it's kind of satisfying to think about in a certain way, but it doesn't really solve the underlying problem,
Well, that's why I went on the big rant that I did earlier about tactical center discourse, right? Because that's really...
How would you advance that?
Oh, God. I really don't want to go into this part because it's going to turn into me working and I'm a lazy asshole. But, like, basically...
Somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
Honestly, if I knew how to crack that nut, I would. And that's basically why I huddle in frustration at this whole mishap, is because I don't know how to take, like, 25 years of subjectively Negro enough history until I cram it into somebody's head and go, okay, now go teach the masses while I go make some money.
Well, so without volunteering for any work yourself, what needs to happen? Like, what needs to happen?
Basically, the protesting body globally, right, needs to understand that all of the successes in human history, at least that I'm aware of, from a civil rights perspective, have come from arguing for enlightened self-interest because it does not require you to win hearts and minds. And that's really what we're talking about, right? What we're talking about is the fact that hearts and minds are ultimately unwinnable. And in an increasingly polarized environment, whatever piecemeal victories you were going to get in an arguably more normal state, you're not going to get now, right? So stop trying. Don't try to make someone agree with you that your life matters. Instead, try to agree on something that benefits the two of you. Whether it benefits the two of you asynchronously is not important.
Yeah.
Right?
That asynchronous one, I think, might be contentious, but I'm not going to comment on it.
I mean, it is contentious because you're telling people who are very convinced that they matter that it's not about them. So it's going to get contentious, which is the problem I've run into, right? But that's basically what you're doing is you're saying, like, here's how you form your arguments. It's that the Nazi agrees with you, and no one wants the Nazi to agree with them, so they freak out.
Oh,
right.
Okay, that's a theory. I don't know. Yeah.
But that's the point, right? Is that like the myth is that you can do away with all the Nazis. That's not actually a thing. Humans have never killed an idea in all of existence that humans have been alive. Like that's not real. You can't do that. So stop trying to
Flat Earth is coming back, guys.
Right. There's a million people that believe the Earth is flat. Clearly, you cannot kill an idea. So stop trying to kill an idea. Don't argue for that. Doesn't
the Grux say you can't find a meme with an exploit?
I've never heard that, but that's amazing. I'm taking it.
That's a bumper sticker.
But yeah, basically that's what needs to happen. Is some educating body needs to put out into the raging masses that look, the way to do this is not to continually attempt to focus and bring light to the subjective significance of certain subgroups. We instead simply say X is better for people, and so we should do it. And you let people come to their own conclusions as to why. That way you don't have to argue that part.
People scare and confuse me, so I prefer to think about the the double-edged sword of technology. And
yeah, that's the real reason why I was focused on how to break their toys. I like focusing on robots versus people. People are
absolutely
non-deterministic.
Robots are safe as long as they're not programmed to stab. They don't hurt your feelings.
Well, in the grand scheme of things, regardless of how they're programmed.
No, actually, Spotify recommended a depression playlist to someone I know.
Oh no! Are they still alive?
No, it was just like, "Are you feeling down?" was one of the playlist names, essentially something like that.
Oh my god! If
Netflix
like 10
did
years
that,
ago,
yeah.
Wait,
if
is
Netflix
Spotify
did that,
teaching robots to feel? That's dangerous.
Oh, remember the meme generator that started acting more meta? Anyway,
so there's a differentiation between the automation of these things, and then people are on the ground, to the earlier point, when you no longer have access to the internet, right? And I think it's important to document both of those things. And the question is now, who's going to do it? I think data is still being gathered. Data is gathered.
I mean, like Vyrus, what you're saying is like, you're talking about appealing to enlightened self-interest. It really reminds me of, you listed a lot of people there, but it really reminded me of Malcolm X.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of it.
He was super good at that. Right?
So Malcolm X, co-founder of Black Panthers, along with Huey Newton, along with I always forget the woman's name, which is really sad because she's the one who did the acupuncture, which led to the clean needles program for junkies and the free breakfast program. But anyway, yeah, basically the Black Panthers are like the name everyone knows, but they're also the name that the reason everyone knows that name is because that's the name that was now it has all been declassified and they admit it. It's literally the one that was targeted by the CIA. And the way that they target it is exactly like they target any other quote-unquote insurgency. Right? And so that's basically my point is, the reason why resources as large as that were used to counter that force is because it works. It's effective.
Yeah.
Basically, the platitude
in that situation, the only solution is to stay hidden. Like you have no chance.
Yes.
So you have to stay hidden. Yeah.
And that's what people did. The whole platitude of the argument is like I said, I have family members who literally died for the idea that separate is inherently unequal. Right? Mm-hmm. The problem in 2020 is that concept is by definition antithetical to the concept of, for example, safe spaces. Like if you're special, then you can't be equal.
Hey guys, remember safe spaces?
I'm just using it as a
I'm just saying,
node.
you're making a lot of
Except for
statements, and
those.
a lot of them are very contentious statements. So like, I'm just not going to comment on them because I don't have enough background to like. I've heard enough stuff. It's like they've made convincing arguments in like every direction on this topic, and so it's like I'm not. I'm just going to sit back and watch.
I mean,
I
I'm
think
not
it makes sense
saying.
like. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm not saying safe spaces are bad. I'm just saying they are antithetical to the idea that like by separating a platform, you make it unequal.
In the context of COVID, safe spaces strike me as hilarious. Like,
I mean, that's kind of the problem, right? Is that like what I'm talking
haven't-
about is a platform that arguably, in my opinion, according to history, has evidence of showing equality, but there's a large portion of the protesting masses right now that genuinely do not want equality. They want equity, right? And the problem with equity is that there is no prior art for any group of humans agreeing on the definition of equitable.
That's problematic.
Right.
Sure, like,
And
like I
so,
said,
It's
there's arguments in some rates that you want to force that a conversation to be had right away, and just don't shy away from it. And I don't know. Like I said, I'm not the expert on the history, so I don't want to comment because I'm not speaking from
I'm
the
not saying I'm an
life.
expert. I've just, whatever. I read some stuff, but that's basically what I'm saying is that there is evidence to support tactical civil discourse and arguing for enlightened self-interest to achieve equality. There is no data on equity, and which one we want. Frankly, this generation needs to decide. I can't help that.
Isn't there though like kind of a fundamental problem that there has to be like some finite number of spokesmen for spokespeople for a movement that make these arguments, and if there are some small set of people that lead a movement, they're probably going to get assassinated.
Yeah.
Like, so I mean, if you think about everything's decentralized, like gig economy, no politics makes sense anyway these days. People just like say random crap, throw it against the wall, and then like I guess there's going to be an election and some random stuff will happen. I have no idea. I can't make sense of any of this.
China and India are at it.
Okay,
Oh,
so what you're
God.
saying is we need to memify the idea of enlightened self-interest as a protest tactic.
No,
Gotcha.
I think one of the spin-offs of enlightened self-interest is voluntary association.
Oh, okay. That's a deep topic that has a lot of interesting connotations, but maybe we should save that. I don't know.
Well, I mean, so at a very small level, it's like I want to think about what I might be able to do, and it's like you have protesters, and at a low level, they have this trade-off with phones and not having another way of communicating without phones, and it's just like that's a problem I can sort of get my head around.
Well, here's a question
Right.
I'll pose to you, Ben, specifically with your
All right.
experiences being what they are, because this was the question that I wondered after the two events that I was arm's distance to. Does communication actually help? Because I know that I feel like you and we're really high on the technical, and like we're
I've
quote
gotten
unquote
reports
like
from people on the ground that help people stay less panicky when stuff changed situations.
yeah, but what does that mean? And I'm not saying that to discount what you're saying. I'm genuinely asking, like, what is the value? Like, how, like, I would, as somebody who's dipped my toe into this,
you have a plausible evidence that something that's about to happen is not tear gas, even if a bunch of people are shouting tear gas.
I can give you a couple of examples. So at a protest, there's a certain amount of kind of herd coordination that has to happen, and it usually happens in a very decentralized way. Like everybody hears some, rumor there's going to be a protest, a certain, such and such a day. Usually there's a bunch of different organizations involved. People are like in these little insular activist groups. And and then they all get together for these bigger events. They all show up. And then, maybe, at this time it's like you have a bunch of these like anarchists show up, and it's they're supposed to be letting Black Lives Matter kind of lead the way, but they have sort of problems not taking the stage and talking about their own agendas when they get a chance, and so all the people show up, and they know in principle that's like they're going to a protest, but they don't necessarily know what they're doing moment to moment, and that's where this kind of like herd organization thing goes on, and you have people kind of like when the cops move the lines, maybe they're trying to keep a street blocked off, so they need more people moved over here to support the line. Or in other situations, and this time they had people lying down in front of traffic, and that's a situation where it's like if there's a small number of people, they get surrounded by the cops. They'll all get chucked in the back of a van. But if you can message enough people fast enough to come to a certain intersection, then there's too many people to arrest.
You
right?
could hear things, for example, bring zip ties to a certain location, and
yeah.
What I'm hearing is it's basically rapid response is the value of communication in a protest.
Yes.
Because
Absolutely.
each protester can choose whether or not to individually respond to a quote unquote call to action. So from that perspective, it's very much who gives a shit if they turn the internet off, because that only happens when shit's already gone way too bad. Right? It's more how do you take the mob communicative platform that is, for example, Twitter, and simplify it into requests, and then people can choose to respond or not. It's almost like a private broadcast.
Also there were dumb ass idiots who would try and spam the hashtag, we're gonna get a meme going on Q Twitter, retweet this Patriots to flood hashtags with stuff. You just mute those 4 people who are doing it, and it doesn't go anywhere.
Could you use Mastodon for that?
I mean,
so
people don't have that installed on their phones by default.
Mastodon is an interesting attempt at a decentralized social network. And it's an interesting technology. It's an attempt to kind of replace Facebook with something that wouldn't be controlled by a central entity, or at least not Mark Zuckerberg. But it hasn't really taken off. I have a couple friends that are using it just out of some kind of wanting to support the concept. But I think that as tech people we have to remember that all of the other people are not tech people, right? So whatever the solution is has to be really easy to use, and probably oversimplified, especially because there's adrenaline. People are going to have tear gas in their eyes. There's a lot of noise. It's but the thing with Mastodon is everybody with a social network, you have to have enough people that know to go to it to look at stuff, right? So the harder problem, harder than messaging, so I didn't even bring it up because I don't know how to solve it, is these people that have to be there streaming video to the internet, right? How could you do that without using Google or Amazon or Facebook, for fuck's sake?
Instagram reports their feeds. I know this because I was watching curling one time.
Instagram is owned by Facebook.
I was live streaming the curling championships, and it got a copyright claim. Live stream. I don't know if they were doing audio in the audio stream, or if they were doing something in the video, or they were actually trying to do pattern analysis, but it caught it.
How far do we want to get into the weeds on this? Because I feel like the technical components are relatively simple. The question is,
I know, it's just
how to socialize the viewership.
Right.
Well, that's exactly the problem. You could stream video up to a Mastodon server, but no one will know to go there, really, right? And there's no. So the thing about Facebook and Twitter is that they publish activity that happens on the site to other people's feeds, and that's kind of.
And maybe you've stumbled upon the answer. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's like malware, to use an example. Maybe you stand up an intermediate C2 that receives the stream, and then there are individuals or technological components that stand between the quote-unquote end user and the stream originator, and the idea is that middle layer can be malleable, right?
That was I was just watching Twitter, and one guy was like, "Hey, here's this open emitter timer." It's oh shit, does anyone have a hack RF? And it's oh, I know lots of friends who have a hack RF. Why aren't we running this?
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? It's if you're if all of us are at a protest and one of us he's got the stream going to a Mastodon server, and then the Mastodon link gets linked out to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and then Instagram takes it down, so 100 million other people who have now seen it and noticed that it's down say, "Hey, it's down. I have it up on my stream," or something that. You create that layer, right?
You need to do peer-to-peer video somehow, I feel like. Otherwise, you need storage or bandwidth, and that's not a trivial problem. I don't know.
That actually is I mean, the reason they're using Facebook and AWS and Google is because all of those companies run their own data centers with like load balancers and
They own the
massive.
traffic, so they're not paying the tariffs.
They're all internet peers, yeah.
Right, but the point is that like this is a solved problem with M3 or with what is it? M3.
Well, it used to. Yeah, I used to stream. It was like Icecast, right?
So the reason I'm
Winamp.
bringing this up, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm actually kind of sort of like I got voluntold to be part of this project with some hackers that all of you probably know to do like DEF CON movie night, and this is an active. And this is an active conversation.
I've seen some of this. I've used some recent innovations in streaming technology that are just really nice.
So we've been doing some beta tests with like 1,000 people, a few thousand people of real time streaming. And granted, this is recorded, but basically, if you take the recording latency out of the mix and you replace it with live stream latency and frame drop, it's basically the same problem.
Oh
right?
yeah, no, right. It's just a solvable problem, and it's cool to see that there's advancement in the art there.
Yeah, so it basically turns out that like the media API in all the big browsers is basically how you do this. And the reason that's how you do it is because...
Don't go looking for use after free bugs in those libraries.
No, whoa, dude, don't even get me started. But the point is that all of the CDNs support it, and all of the browsers support it, and hopefully in the very near future, Google is finally going to push QUIC support to it, and once they do it, everybody will be forced...
They haven't done that already?
They have not done that already.
Oh, I
because
figured they would have done that a long time ago.
Okay, so technically,
yes. It's an open standard. It's probably the standards body.
In Chrome, it's not in the media library, which is the open standard.
That's what WG.
They're currently in the process of pushing it to the open standard, which is a big deal because that means it doesn't matter transparently which one you're using under the hood. As a user, your experience won't change.
Right.
And the fact that all the CDNs support it means by default, even though they're never going to announce it because they don't want people to use it this way, that Facebook and Twitter and all the major platforms are effectively supporting it because they're built on these much larger platforms like Akamai and EC2 and all the major CDNs, right? Yeah. So there is a world where you stream to one instance. It could be your house if you're that worried about, or whoever's got FiOS or whatever, somebody's got a racked box, right? You get one person. How do you think
Amazon implemented Prime Video?
Not with that.
And that's complicated.
Bezos' Plex server.
I don't know. It's
Bezos' Plex server.
It's all feasible, and I feel like all of those companies eat their own dog food.
That's highly debatable, but
sure. Anyway,
dumb down the solution for me. So when this is rolled out to the CDNs, what is the final thing look like?
Okay, so basically the TLDR is you have basically the video equivalent of an M3U file. And the M3U file has a description for a series of streams in it. And your browser knows how to select those different streams, select the two that, for whatever system reasons, it feels are most appropriate for it, which include resolution and latency for both video and audio. And then it subscribes to them with basically code under the hood, right? Basically a socket. And then it renders it however your page is set up. That's the HTML relationship part, right? And so you have a server that captures video, and there's tons of documentation on how to do this for live video, and the servers produce this stream file, and then at that point you basically let web tech take over, and you have WebSockets that basically form a network of load balancers up to your different regions.
This is everything I've dreamed about for a while. So
and then each of those regions select a stream file and then subscribe to it. And under the hood, this is exactly how Netflix and Discord, like anything you've ever, like these days, if you watch anything like that is streamed by professionals over a website, this is exactly how it fucking works. And the big deal here is that basically the way that major CDNs have gotten around the bottleneck of latency when it comes to the mutating formats of audio and video is that the clients themselves and the browsers basically solve this problem for you are highly contextually sensitive. Your phone is only going to give a shit about resolutions that it can support, about latencies that it feels it can meter over its existing connection, and resolutions that it knows that it can display in its screen. It's not going to look at 4K, Hardware. It's not going to look at 60 frame. Like all of this is embedded in the browser did the work for you. right?
Some of it has
So-
to relate to hardware encoding anyway. Never mind.
Yeah, that's some of it, but it's not important, right? What's important is that you, as the user, just click a link, and all of the technologies you have to use to access that link do filtering for you to make sure that you never use more network than you need. And this makes it work on CDNs, and the CDNs mean that all you need to do is produce a source link. So if you're at a protest and you produce a source link, as long as your source link has a stable link to the internet, right? And now the ball is in all of our court, because if you don't have to broadcast to everybody, you only need to broadcast to one place incredibly resiliently and as covertly as possible, right? The rest of the internet will do the work for you.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Sorry, I didn't mean to soapbox that hard. That ended up being
No,
a
no,
soapbox.
that's no, that's.
I'm
I mean,
sorry.
that all sounds like great
That's-
stuff. So glad to see
That's
you
our,
work there.
hackers ranting is our brand. That's
By the way,
that's what we do.
you know who hasn't been ranting?
Daniel.
No, I was gonna say callers to the hacker helpline.
Oh yeah. Well, we do have a hacker helpline. It's area code 206-486-6272 or 486-NARC with a C. If you'd like to leave us a message or react to something you've heard, or if you have a practical hacking question or grievance or a rant of your own, but at this point, we'll take any audio that is deposited at this voicemail address at all.
Questions about
Um,
RatNet, you know.
Questions about RatNet. Yeah. Once more, it's 602-486-6272.
This,
Well,
206 area code
what did I say?
602. We're good.
Oh, the sound of my blood sugar dropping means. Although this has been awesome. This has been an excellent conversation. I can't. I'm so glad that that we got together and that we got this recorded. It's I really thank everybody for being here, and I thank Will for being here, although he had to drop. But I think we probably need to wrap it up, because at this point, this is our longest episode ever. So
I want to shout out look for local mask making projects in your area. That's a practical way anyone can get involved right now, and just like if you want to feel like you're contributing to something, because there's just a shortage of mask material that's usable. Even if you have one, reusable is good if you care about your health. So I'm just saying, there's lots of different local efforts, and just look into that.
Yeah, that's good. And the folding at home stuff's still going. You can check previous episodes for information about that. Final thoughts, Vyrus?
I'm just gonna cover all the news stuff that I had in my queue that we didn't get to. The funky CPU thing I was talking about is called Bad Apple. I encourage people to look at it. It's pretty cool. There is a GitHub link at mxrch/PENG lab LAB that is a way to use Google Collaboratory to spin up free graphics cards in the cloud and use them for password cracking. Totally supported with Hashcat. The CrackMapexec now works with LDAP. Yay! Ways to break things. And I guess a news article that is still unfolding that I wondered whether or not we were going to get to news articles is recently there's been a story where a bunch of garage pull knots in NASCAR were being investigated by the FBI because one of them awkwardly looks like a noose. I will encourage you to read the report because the FBI says it's not a noose, and it clearly is. So WTF is going on there. Beyond that, just a personal shout out. My partner has a mask store of her own called SEW Lucian, LUICAN.
Perfect.
Selling bespoke, 100% cotton washable masks of both the accordion style and the N95 style for coverage with pipe cleaner for nose support. They can be worn for long periods of time as tested by my podiatrist cousin. So
Excellent. Justin, closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I'm concerned about now is making of the manuals. One on the electrical side, one on the computer side, and then I don't know, maybe a third for on the ground.
You mean like for protesters, kind of like
I
the.
do.
Do you remember that cop that used to do the those videos on like how to talk to cops?
Yeah, there's several of those people. I've seen a lot of those videos.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
be something like that for protesters. That's a good idea. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it would be useful to be handed out on the when there's stuff going on, because the more coordination you have, ostensibly, the more chances of actual effect that you have.
Awesome. Well, we thank you for listening, and we're gonna leave you here. But now more than ever, hacking is not just a crime; it's a survival
survival
trade.
trade.